I went camping in October of 2018 because I had just quit my warehouse job and I did not want to go back to my parents' place yet. I had been sleeping in my car for almost 2 weeks, moving between parking lots and rest stops, telling myself it was temporary. The days felt stuck. My head felt loud. I wanted a few nights where the only thing I had to think about was daylight and weather. The woods always worked for that. I grew up hiking in northern Georgia. I knew the Blue Ridge foothills well enough to feel calm there. I chose a spot close to town, close enough that I could drive out fast if I needed to. Nothing deep, nothing wild. The campsite was not official. It was a flat clearing just off an old forest road, used often enough that the ground was hard and bare in the middle. There was an old fire ring made of stones that had turned black from years of use. I saw beer cans crushed into the dirt, some rusted, some newer. A broken camp chair lay half buried in leaves. Felt ordinary, familiar. I parked my car a short walk away and carried my pack in. The air smelled like cold leaves and damp soil. The trees were tall but spaced out. Enough light came through that it never felt closed in. I set up my tent before dark. I laid my sleeping bag out and organized my food. I cooked a simple meal and ate sitting on a log. The sun dropped behind the ridge and the temperature fell fast. The woods went quiet in that way they do when evening settles in. I felt better than I had in days. My body was tired. My head felt slower. That was what I wanted. It was just before full dark when I noticed something downhill from the clearing. About 50 yards away, between 2 trees, there was a blue tarp stretched tight. It was tied high, sloping down like a roof. It caught what little light was left and stood out against the brown woods. I froze when I saw it. I was sure it had not been there earlier. I would have noticed the color. I walked to the edge of the clearing and looked closer. I did not go all the way down. There were no lights, no gear underneath that I could see, no sound. I stood there for a long time listening. I told myself someone else had come in late and set it up while I was cooking. That made sense. The area was used. People camped wherever they wanted. Still, it bothered me that I had not heard anything. I went back to my tent and zipped it shut once it was dark. I lay there listening to normal night sounds. Wind moving leaves, something small moving through brush, an owl far off. Nothing felt wrong. I slept for a while. I woke up sometime after midnight. I did not know why at first. My body just came awake. I lay still and listened. At first there was nothing. Then I heard a sound that did not fit. It was slow and low. Not a step. Not a footfall. It sounded like something heavy being pulled across leaves. A dragging sound, soft but steady, came from downhill from the direction of the tarp. The sound moved uphill a little, then stopped. I sat up inside my tent without thinking. The moment I did, the sound stopped too. I stayed still. My heart started beating harder. After a long pause, the sound started again. It moved a few feet closer, then stopped again. No breathing. No voice, no cough, just the weight-shifting sound, like fabric or something dense brushing leaves. I checked my phone. The time was 2:10 a.m. I did not turn on my flashlight. I did not unzip the tent. I sat there holding my breath. The sound moved again, closer this time, then stopped. I stayed upright, afraid to lie down, afraid to move. I tried to tell myself it was an animal. A bear would have made more noise. A deer would have moved faster. This was slow, careful, felt aware of me. At some point the sound stopped completely. I do not know how long I sat there. My legs started to ache. My mouth felt dry. Eventually I lay back down without making noise. I did not sleep again that night. I listened until the sky lightened and birds started moving. When it was full morning, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The woods looked normal, calm. The blue tarp was gone. I walked downhill to where it had been. The ground beneath it was pressed flat, leaves crushed and dark, like something heavy had been there for a long time. The outline of the tarp was clear. There were no footprints around it. No trash, no rope ends, nothing left behind. I stood there longer than I should have. I felt exposed. I kept scanning the trees. I told myself to pack up and leave. Instead, I went back to camp and started packing slowly. I folded my sleeping bag with care. I rolled my tent neatly. I kept my movements calm. I had this strong feeling that whatever had been there was watching me, and that sudden movement would mean something. I do not know why I thought that. It was just there in my chest. As I packed, I noticed other small things I had missed. Leaves disturbed in places that did not make sense. A faint track where something had been dragged uphill, not deep enough to be a trail, but enough to see once I looked for it. It led from where the tarp had been toward my camp, then stopped short. I did not follow it. I loaded my pack and walked back to my car. I did not run. I did not look back. I drove out and did not stop until I reached a gas station. I sat there for a long time before getting out. Later that day, I thought about it again and again. I tried to find a normal answer. The only thing that made sense was that someone had been living out there using a tarp shelter. Someone who did not want to be seen. Someone who moved at night and froze when noticed. The dragging sound could have been them pulling their gear or themselves uphill, staying low. The lack of footprints made sense too if they moved carefully and knew the ground. The flattened area showed long use. The fact that the tarp was gone by morning meant they were alert and fast when they wanted to be. What stayed with me was not fear in the moment. It was the control. The way the movement stopped when I sat up. The way it resumed only when I stayed still. Whoever it was had been aware of me long before I knew about them. They had chosen not to be seen. They had chosen how close to come. I did not camp again for a long time after that. I went back to my parents' place a few days later. I told them I needed a reset. I never mentioned the tarp or the sounds. I still hike those areas sometimes, but I stay on official sites now. I pick places with clear boundaries and rules. When I think about that night, I do not imagine anything unreal. I picture a tired person living quietly in the woods, watching me from the dark, deciding whether I was a threat or just another passing body. That thought has weight, feels real, feels enough. I planned the trip because my friend Josh was falling apart and I did not know what else to do. His divorce had dragged on for months, and during that time his drinking stopped being social and started becoming constant. He drank in the mornings. He drank to sleep. Every plan we made ended with him drunk and angry or quiet and hollow. I thought getting him away from bars and phones might slow him down. A high-altitude camping trip had worked on me before. Thin air, cold nights, long walks, simple food. No cell service. No crowds. Just fishing and quiet. I told myself it would give him space to breathe and give me a chance to keep an eye on him. We drove up early and parked at a pullout that barely fit the truck. The trail climbed fast through pine and rock. The air thinned enough to feel sharp in the lungs. Josh struggled more than usual, sweating and breathing hard, but he did not complain. That felt like progress. By afternoon, we reached a small basin with a creek running through it, fed by snowmelt higher up. The water was clear and cold. The campsite sat just off the bank, flat enough for 2 tents, ringed by stones from years of use. No trash, no carved trees. Felt clean and forgotten. The first night passed without trouble. We cooked, fished a little, and sat by the fire until the cold pushed us into our sleeping bags. Josh drank less than usual. He fell asleep fast. I lay awake listening to the creek and felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. The second day was quiet. We fished in the morning and explored upstream in the afternoon. The weather stayed clear, but the temperature dropped fast once the sun dipped. That night the fire felt smaller, like it could not push back the dark the way it had the night before. Shadows pressed close. The wind moved through the trees in slow bursts. Josh seemed restless. He shifted and stared into the fire longer than needed. I noticed he kept scanning the tree line, but I told myself it was just the dark playing tricks. Sometime after midnight, he woke me by moving hard in his sleeping bag. I was half asleep when he did it, and at first I thought something was wrong with the tent. Then he did it again, more urgent. He kept insisting I had been walking around. He was certain he heard boots circling the tent, stopping right by his head. I had not left my sleeping bag once. I had not even sat up. I lay there listening. I heard nothing but the creek and the wind. I tried to settle him without speaking, shifting my weight, making noise so he could tell where I was. He stayed tense. It happened again not long after. Then again. Each time he woke convinced I had been moving outside. His breathing stayed shallow. I could feel his fear through the thin wall of the tent. I did not want to feed it. I waited until he fell quiet again before moving. When the sky started to lighten, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The ground around the tent was soft from frost melt. I saw the impressions immediately. They circled the tent in a loose loop, stopping near where Josh's head had been. They were deep, deeper than my boots would have made. They were longer too. The shape was wrong for boots. The front spread wide, with long marks that looked like toes splayed apart, almost like hands pressed into the dirt. The heel was narrow. There was no tread. The stride was uneven, like whoever made them had been crouched or leaning. I walked the perimeter slowly. The prints did not lead straight in from the trees. They appeared close to camp, circled once, then faded out toward the creek. Near the water, the ground turned rocky and the trail vanished. I checked my own boots against the marks. They did not match. Josh's boots were smaller and left a clear pattern. These did not belong to either of us. I packed the rest of the morning in silence. Josh did not ask questions. He would not look at the ground. He moved fast, stuffing gear without order. On the hike out, he stayed ahead of me, breathing hard, never slowing. When we reached the truck, he sat inside and stared forward until we drove away. He refused to talk about it on the drive. I did not push. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. A bare front paw could leave long prints. A person without shoes could leave strange marks. The mind can turn stress into certainty. Josh had been drinking heavily for months. Lack of sleep at altitude can twist perception. I held onto those ideas because they felt safe. 2 weeks later, after he had sobered enough to sound like himself again, he admitted more. He said that during the fire the night before, he had seen something crouched at the edge of the light. It stayed just beyond where the flames reached. It was shaped wrong, low and wide, arms too long for the body. He could not see the face clearly, only a pale patch that shifted when it moved. He said it did not rush or retreat. It just stayed there until the fire burned down. He told me this without drama, like he was listing facts he had tried to forget. I did not argue with him. I told him what I had seen in the morning. The prints, the way they circled the tent, the depth of them. We talked through it carefully. We ruled out animals based on stride and placement. Bears do not circle tents like that. They approach and test. They leave clear tracks. We considered another camper, but there had been no gear, no sound of footsteps, no trail in or out. A person moving barefoot would have left more variation, more signs of balance shifting. These prints were deliberate. The explanation that settled in was not dramatic. It was unsettling because it was simple. Someone else had been there. Someone who knew the area well enough to move quietly and stay downwind. Someone who stayed low and kept their distance, watching us without announcing themselves. The long arm shape Josh described could have been a person crouched, wrapped in layers, firelight stretching proportions. Alcohol and fear could fill in gaps. The prints could have been hands as well as feet, a person moving on all fours to stay hidden, spreading weight to avoid noise. That would explain the depth and shape. It would explain the circling and the pause near the head of the tent, the closest point to where breathing was loudest. That explanation did not make me feel better. It made me feel worse. It meant the presence was careful, curious, and controlled. It meant someone chose to stay unseen and close. Josh stopped camping after that. He quit drinking a few months later, slowly, with help. He told me the trip scared him in a way alcohol never had. I still fish that area. I go during the day. I park where I can see my truck. I stay aware of the tree line. I leave before dark. I never camp there anymore. I do not need to imagine anything unreal to feel uneasy. I know what quiet people can do when they want to remain unseen, and I know how thin the line is between solitude and being observed. We went camping because my dad wanted one last family summer before I left for college. He said it without making a big deal out of it, but I could feel the weight behind the idea. He had planned the trip months ahead, picked a campground he remembered from when I was a kid, the kind with numbered sites, fire rings set in concrete, picnic tables bolted into the ground. It was not remote. It was meant to feel safe. He wanted something ordinary we could point back to later and say it counted. We arrived in the afternoon. The campground was loud in the normal way. Kids rode bikes between sites, tires crunching gravel. Dogs barked and pulled at leashes. Radios played low. Someone laughed too hard a few sites down. Our spot sat near the middle loop, close enough to the bathrooms to hear the door slam now and then. The trees were tall but spaced wide. The ground was packed dirt with needles pressed flat from years of use. The picnic table was old and scarred, names carved into it, edges worn smooth by weather and hands. We set up without rushing. My dad checked the tent stakes twice. My mom organized food. I walked the loop and watched people settle in. It felt like a place that shut off once night came, like everyone agreed on a curfew without saying it. As the sun dropped, the noise thinned. Bikes leaned against trees. Dogs quieted. Fires burned lower. The air cooled and flattened. By the time we crawled into the tent, the campground had gone still in a way that felt sharp. There was no wind, no insects, no distant traffic. The silence felt held, like something pressed down over everything. I lay awake listening to my own breathing and the soft shift of the sleeping bags. My parents fell asleep fast. Around midnight, I noticed a sound that did not belong to the night. It was a slow creak wood under weight. Not a step, not a snap. Came again, patient and measured. The picnic table sat a few feet from the tent. The sound lined up with where the bench would be if someone sat down carefully. I stayed still and listened. The creak repeated, then settled like weight shifting and then resting. I tried to make sense of it. Another camper could have wandered over. Someone drunk and confused. The loop was full during the day. Still, there were no voices, no footsteps on gravel, just the table taking weight. The sound came again, slight, as if someone leaned forward and then back. It was close enough that I could picture the bench flexing. My dad stirred. He assumed it was another camper. I felt him tense and then relax, the way adults do when they decide something is normal. He made a noise meant to get attention. A clearing of the throat turned outward. The sound from the table stopped instantly. It did not fade. Cut off clean like a switch. There were no footsteps leaving. No shuffle on dirt. No movement through brush. The silence snapped back into place. We waited. Nothing happened. My dad lay back down. I stayed awake longer, counting breaths, trying to hear anything at all. The night held. Eventually, exhaustion won. In the morning, the campground woke up slowly. Doors opened. Someone coughed. Pot clanged. Light filled the tent. When we stepped outside, the picnic table looked wrong. Along the edge of the bench closest to the tent, deep gouges ran in a line. They were not shallow scratches. They cut into the wood, angled slightly upward, like something hard had been dragged with pressure. The marks were uneven but deliberate, spaced close together. They were fresh enough that pale would showed through. My dad crouched and traced them with his eyes, careful not to touch. He took pictures from different angles, including the underside of the bench. The gouges continued there too, not as deep but still clear. They were too straight to be from weather, too focused to be random damage. They lined up with where fingers might rest if someone gripped the edge and pulled. We walked the site and looked for other signs. There were no footprints that stood out. The dirt was hard-packed. Whatever had been there left no clear trail. A ranger came by later that morning during a routine pass. He examined the bench and the marks, ran his hand close without pressing. He explained through his tone and gestures that bears did not make damage like that. Bears tore and splintered. They crushed. These lines were controlled. He noted the lack of other signs and suggested keeping food sealed, then moved on. We packed up sooner than planned. My dad stayed calm and methodical, the way he did when he wanted to keep things steady. He did not make jokes. He did not dismiss it. He finished loading the car and took one last look at the table before we left. The drive home was quiet. The day felt too bright. The memory of the sound stayed with me, the way it stopped all at once. That night, the house felt louder than usual. I slept poorly. Later that week, I saw my dad scrolling through his phone, stopping on the pictures he had taken. He stared at them longer than needed. That night, I checked again out of curiosity and they were gone. Not moved. Deleted. He never explained why. Years later, I understand it better. The marks on the bench were consistent with a person, not an animal. Someone could have been sitting there, gripping the edge with long nails or something hard worn on their hands, dragging them slowly while waiting. The controlled stop made sense if they froze when they realized they were noticed. The lack of departure noise meant they had been positioned to move without sound, maybe already crouched, maybe already braced. The campground had felt safe because it was busy. At night, that safety depended on everyone following the same unspoken rules. Whoever sat at our table did not. They did not take food. They did not announce themselves. They tested presence and stayed still when attention came their way. That kind of behavior fits a person who knows how to avoid being seen. My dad deleting the pictures makes sense too. He did not want a record that would turn a memory into something official. He did not want me leaving for college with that image fixed and searchable. He wanted the trip to remain what it was meant to be, even if it failed at that. I still think about the silence of that night, how complete it was, how it returned so quickly. I camp now and then, but I avoid crowded campgrounds. They give a false sense of safety that disappears after dark. I pay attention to small sounds and how they end. I look at picnic tables differently, at the edges where hands rest and grip. Some marks are easy to explain, some are not. I went camping because I needed quiet after a breakup that had broken my sleep into short pieces. 4 hours a night if I was lucky, most nights less. My head felt thin and stretched, like a wire pulled too tight. I wanted a place where nothing expected anything from me. I did not tell anyone where I was going. I turned my phone off before I left. I liked the clean edge of that decision. No check-ins, no updates, just time. I drove for most of the day and ended up at a Forest Service road I had used once years earlier. It was not remote, but it felt forgotten. The road was rutted and narrow, lined with trees that leaned in. I found a small clearing near a bend, big enough to park and set a fire ring if I wanted. There were old tire marks pressed into dirt and leaves, softened by rain. No fresh trash, no sign of anyone nearby. The air smelled like pine and dust. It was late afternoon and warm, but the light already felt thin. I stayed simple. I did not set up a tent. I planned to sleep in the car if I needed to. I laid out food, filled a bottle from the last store I had passed, and sat on the bumper to eat. The quiet was steady. Wind moved high in the trees but did not reach the ground. I felt myself slow down without trying. My breathing evened out. My hands stopped shaking. As the sun dropped, the forest changed tone. Colors flattened. Shadows stretched. The clearing shrank. I walked a short loop to loosen my legs. The path was faint but clear enough to follow without thinking. My boots made soft sounds on dirt and needles. I focused on that rhythm. It felt good to move without purpose. That was when I heard my name. Came from far off, stretched thin by distance. It did not echo. It did not sound playful or sharp. It sounded flat, like someone saying it without energy. I stopped walking. The sound did not repeat right away. I stood still and listened. Nothing else moved. No birds. No insects. Just the hush of trees holding their breath. I told myself it was nothing. Sound travels in strange ways in the woods. Someone could be hiking farther out. A name can sound like another word when carried. I kept walking. After a few steps, I heard it again. Closer this time. Still calm. Still tired. The sound landed right behind my shoulder. I stopped again. The forest felt smaller. The light dimmed faster than it should have. I waited. When nothing happened, I walked on. The voice followed. It matched my pace. When I slowed, it slowed. When I stopped, it stopped. There were no footsteps, no branch snaps, just the voice placing my name into the air like it belonged there. What scared me was not the fact that someone was calling out. It was the sound itself. It matched me. The tone was wrong in a specific way I recognized. It carried the same dry edge my voice had when I was tired and had not slept enough. The same shallow breath between words. It sounded like me after a long day, trying not to sound worn down. I turned off the path and headed back toward the clearing. I did not run. I kept my steps steady. The voice adjusted without effort. It stayed just out of reach. I felt watched without seeing anything. My shoulders tightened. My hands went cold. I focused on the shape of the trees, the slope of the ground, anything solid. When the clearing came into view, the voice stopped. The quiet snapped back into place. I stood there for a long moment before moving again. My car looked unchanged. The light had faded to gray. I did not unpack anything else. I got in, locked the doors, and moved my seat back. I slept in short bursts. Every sound woke me. A branch falling far off sounded close. Wind against metal made my heart jump. I checked the locks more than once. I did not hear the voice again, but I did not relax. The night felt long and tight. Morning came slowly. The forest filled with light without warmth. I stepped out and stretched, stiff and foggy. That was when I saw the hood. Dust had settled overnight, a fine layer that showed every mark. Near the front edge were 2 handprints. They were pressed flat, palms wide, fingers spread. The fingers were not even. One was shorter than the rest. Another bent slightly to the side. The palms were wider than mine. The prints were clean, like whoever made them had placed their weight down and then lifted straight off. I stood there staring, trying to line up explanations. Someone could have walked by. Someone could have leaned on the car out of curiosity. The road was not private, but the placement was wrong. The prints were centered, balanced, not casual. They faced inward, as if the person had been looking through the windshield. There were no other marks around them. No footprints in the dust. No smears. I checked the ground around the car. The dirt was hard and dry. It did not hold prints well. A careful person could move without leaving much behind. I wiped the hood clean with my sleeve and packed up fast. On the drive out, I replayed the night and forced myself to slow it down. Exhaustion can do strange things to hearing. The brain fills gaps. Stress can layer familiar patterns onto unknown sounds. A person calling out from a distance can sound different when the air shifts. Someone could have heard me earlier at the store, seen my car, followed out of boredom or curiosity. Mimicking a voice is not hard if you listen long enough. Matching pace is easy if you watch from cover. The handprints fit that explanation too. Person with wide hands, uneven fingers from an old injury, leaning forward to look inside, testing if the doors were locked, leaving when they were not worth the trouble. What made it stick with me was how little effort it took. No rush, no noise, just patience. Whoever it was did not need to scare me into leaving. They just needed me to know they were there and capable of getting close. That was enough. I drove straight home and slept for almost 12 hours. The breakup still hurt. My sleep did not fix itself overnight, but the need for total quiet faded. I started telling people where I was going again. I started checking in. The woods did not change. I did. I learned that being alone without witnesses can feel clean, but it also means there is no one to confirm what you hear when the dark decides to answer back. I went camping in June of 2003 because I was 19 and convinced that being alone in the woods was something you either handled or you didn't. I had grown up around people who talked about independence like it was a test you passed once and never had to think about again. I wanted to pass it early. I was between semesters working a part-time job and restless in a way that made staying home feel like losing ground. I chose the backcountry in West Virginia because it felt serious without being extreme. Dense woods, real elevation, places where you could be alone without being lost. I went solo on purpose. I told a friend the general area but not the exact trail. Cell phones were not something you relied on then. I had a map, a compass, and the kind of confidence that comes from not having been scared enough yet. I picked a campsite near a creek because I liked sleeping to running water. Felt steady. It gave the night shape. The hike in took most of the day. The trail narrowed after the first few miles and then broke off into something less defined. The forest thickened. Trees grew closer together, trunks dark with moisture. The ground stayed soft even where the sun reached it. When I heard the creek, it sounded right. Not loud, not weak. A constant flow over rocks, with enough variation to keep it from becoming background noise. I followed it until I found a flat spot above the bank, far enough that rising water would not reach me, close enough to hear it clearly. I set up camp slow and careful. I remember thinking how quiet it felt even during the day. No planes overhead, no distant traffic, just the creek and the occasional bird. I cooked early and watched the light fade through the trees. The air cooled fast once the sun dropped. Mist formed over the water and slid low through the undergrowth. I felt calm in a way that felt earned. I went to sleep early. The sound of the creek carried through my tent like breath. It rose and fell in small patterns, never stopping, never changing pace. I fell asleep thinking about nothing. I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened and I lay still, listening. For a moment, everything felt wrong, but I could not name it. Then I realized what was missing. The creek was silent, not quieter, not distant, gone. The absence pressed in on my ears like pressure. The night felt hollow. I checked my watch. The green glow read 1:42 a.m. I waited, expecting the sound to return. Didn't. The silence stretched long enough to feel intentional. Then I heard splashing. Came from downstream at first, then moved closer. The sound was wet and heavy, like feet landing where water should have been flowing. It moved upstream against the direction the creek normally ran. The splashes were uneven, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, like whoever was moving did not know where the bottom was. There was no voice, no breath, just movement through water that should not have been standing still. I sat up inside the tent. The splashing paused. I stayed still, heart pounding, trying to slow my breathing. After a few seconds, the sound continued, closer now, then stopped again. I could not hear water flowing around it because there was no water sound at all. The creek was still silent. I did not unzip the tent. I did not turn on my light. I stayed exactly where I was and listened. My mind ran through explanations that did not settle. A logjam could slow a creek, but not stop it clean. A sudden drop in flow would still leave trickling. This was nothing. The splashing sounded deliberate, careful. Whoever it was knew where they were stepping. Then, all at once, the creek came back. The sound returned full force, loud and violent, like something had been released. Water rushed over rocks with more volume than before. It surged and slapped against the bank. The sudden noise made me flinch. I felt it in my chest. The splashing stopped the moment the water returned. There was no transition. 1 second of silence, the next a wall of sound. I stayed awake until daylight. I did not sleep again. I listened to every shift in the forest. I replayed the timing over and over. The pause, the movement, the release. Nothing else happened. The creek stayed loud for the rest of the night, then settled back into its normal rhythm by morning. When the light finally filtered through the trees, I got out of the tent slowly. The forest looked normal. The creek ran clear and cold, same as the day before. If I had not heard it stop, I would have never guessed anything had changed. I walked along the bank, careful not to disturb the ground more than needed. About 20 yards upstream, I saw the marks. The mud near the edge was torn and scraped, like something heavy had been dragged toward the water. The marks were deep, straight in places, uneven in others. They did not look like animal tracks. There were no clear footprints alongside them, just a long, disturbed path leading into the creek. I followed the marks to where they entered the water. On the opposite bank, there was nothing. No exit marks, no continuation. Whatever had been dragged went in and stayed in. I looked upstream and saw signs of a temporary blockage. Branches and debris wedged tight between rocks, pressed there with force. Not a natural pile. It had been built up enough to stop the flow entirely for a short time. Standing there in daylight, the pieces fit in a way that made my stomach turn. Someone had been upstream, building a dam in the dark, cutting off the creek. They had moved through the dry bed while the water was held back, dragging something heavy with them. When they were done, they had released it all at once, letting the water surge back and erase most of the evidence. The drag marks told me enough. The lack of return marks told me more. Whatever went into that water was meant to stay there. I packed up without eating. I moved fast but not reckless. I kept scanning the woods, expecting to feel watched, but the forest stayed quiet. On the hike out, I stayed on high ground and crossed streams only where I could see clearly. I did not stop until I reached my car. I never reported what I saw. I was young and did not know how to explain it without sounding uncertain. There was no proof left by the time I left. The water had done its work, but I did not forget it. Years later, I learned more about how people use water to hide things, how temporary dams can be built and removed quickly, how sound changes can control attention. What stayed with me was not fear of the woods. It was the understanding that I had slept a few yards from someone doing something careful and deliberate, using the creek like a tool. I had gone out there to prove I could handle being alone. What I learned instead was that being alone does not mean being the only one present. Sometimes it just means there is no one else to notice when something changes in the dark. We went camping as a group because it was cheaper than renting a cabin and none of us were close friends yet. We all worked in the same department and had been pushed into the idea by a manager who thought shared hardship built trust. Felt awkward from the start. People paired off based on who they already knew, who they shared rides with, who talked the least. I went because it felt easier than saying no and because I had not camped in years. The campground sat in a state forest a few hours from town. It was developed enough to have designated sites and a maintained road, but spread out enough that you could not see your neighbors unless you walked. We arrived in the afternoon, unloaded gear, and staked out our space. Tents went up in loose clusters. Coolers stayed shut. Everyone acted polite and distant. It felt like a company picnic without a schedule. The first night passed without incident. We cooked too much food, drank a little, and sat around the fire pretending to relax. The noise from our site drifted off and never came back. By midnight, most people were in their tents. I slept lightly and woke a few times to shifting fabric and someone coughing, but nothing stood out. The second day was hotter. People split off in small groups to hike or nap. When I came back to camp in the afternoon, I noticed the extra tent near the edge of the clearing. It sat just beyond where our gear was clustered, close to the tree line. It was an old model, faded green, the kind that used straight poles and clips instead of flexible ones. It looked worn but intact. At first I assumed someone had set it up earlier while I was gone. Then I realized it did not belong to anyone. We went through the list in our heads without saying much. No one claimed it. No one recognized it. The ground beneath it was pressed flat, like it had been placed carefully. There were footprints leading toward it, overlapping and smudged from our own movement earlier in the day. There were none leading away. We checked inside without touching much. There was no sleeping bag, no pack, no trash. The floor was bare. The zipper worked. The poles were solid. It did not look abandoned. It looked staged. The rest of the day felt off. People glanced toward the tent more than they meant to. Conversations dropped when someone noticed it again. No one wanted to take responsibility for figuring it out. We told ourselves another group must have used the site before us and forgotten it. That explanation did not fit the lack of dust or leaves inside, but it was easy to hold on to. That night, the fire burned lower than usual. The forest around us felt closer. Sound did not travel far. Around midnight, when most of us were in our tents, we heard the zipper. It was clear and unmistakable. The sound of metal teeth drawing together, steady and controlled. It came from the direction of the extra tent. It did not rush. It did not snag. Closed fully. No one spoke. No one got up. I lay still, listening for movement that never came. There were no footsteps, no shifting weight, just the quiet return of the forest once the sound stopped. I stayed awake for a long time after that, staring at the faint outline of my tent ceiling, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Morning came pale and cool. People emerged slowly, tired and guarded. Someone walked straight to the extra tent without saying anything. The rest of us followed at a distance. The tent was collapsed flat. The poles had snapped inward, bent at sharp angles like they had been forced down from above. The fabric was pressed into the ground, creased and dirty. It looked like something heavy had lain down on it, distributing weight across the frame until it failed. There were no signs of a struggle, no torn fabric, no broken zippers. The ground around it showed deep impressions, but they were wide and uneven, not shaped like clear footprints. It looked like pressure rather than steps. The inside of the tent was empty, just as before. We stood there longer than necessary, trying to understand what we were seeing. Eventually, someone suggested wind. Another person mentioned a falling branch. Both explanations failed when we looked up and saw the clear space above the tent. The poles had not snapped outward or sideways. They had folded in uniformly, as if the tent had been used exactly as intended by something far heavier than a person. We packed up early. The mood shifted from awkward to tight. No one lingered. No one joked. We broke camp fast and left the extra tent where it was. No one wanted to touch it. No one wanted to claim responsibility. Later, we learned the site had been used by a transient camper earlier in the season. Someone who moved often and left little behind. Rangers had mentioned a man who reused abandoned gear, slept in other people's camps once they left, and avoided contact. The tent could have been his. He could have returned quietly, found us there, and decided to wait us out. The zipper sound fit that explanation. Someone checking their shelter, closing it to keep animals out, freezing when they realized they were not alone. The collapsed tent took longer to explain. One theory made sense the more we talked it through. If someone had been hiding nearby, watching us, they could have returned to the tent later, after we went quiet, and used it as cover. If they were larger or carrying weight, the old poles could have failed slowly under pressure. The uniform collapse suggested someone lying down carefully, spreading weight, not jumping or falling. The lack of footprints made sense too. The ground was already disturbed from our group. New impressions would blend in. Someone experienced at moving through campsites could do it without drawing attention. What stayed with me was the timing. The tent appeared during the day, when we were spread out and distracted. The zipper sound happened at night, when we were tired and less likely to act. The collapse happened after we slept, when no one was watching. Each step avoided confrontation. We never camped together again after that. People found excuses. Schedules changed. The shared drive faded into a story told once and then not again. At work, no one brought it up unless someone else did first. It became easier to pretend it had been nothing. I still think about that tent sometimes. Not as something unreal, but as a reminder of how easily space can be shared without consent. How someone patient can move through a group without being seen, using silence and timing instead of force. The woods did not scare me that weekend. People did. We went camping in November of 1997 because my older brother said he needed to clear his head before getting married. He had been wound tight for months, juggling work, planning, family pressure, and his own doubts. I was younger and still looked up to him in a way that made me say yes without thinking. Late fall felt right to him. Cold nights, empty trails, no distractions. He said quiet would fix what talking couldn't. We picked a place without naming it out loud. He liked that it didn't feel like a destination, just a stretch of woods far enough from town that you could forget schedules. We parked at a small turnout and started hiking in by mid-afternoon. The trail was narrow and poorly marked. Leaves covered everything, dull brown and slick where they had packed down. The air smelled sharp and clean. Our breath showed. From the start, he kept glancing back over his shoulder. Not in a jumpy way, more like checking alignment. He slowed, then sped up. When I asked what was wrong, he said it felt like something was following us, staying just out of view. I told him he was stressed and laughed it off. Weddings do that to people. He didn't argue. He just kept looking. We hiked until the light began to thin and found a flat spot near a bend in the trail. No creek nearby, which made the quiet feel deeper. We set up camp without talking much. The cold settled in fast once the sun dropped. The forest went still in that late-season way, like everything had already decided to wait out the night. The first evening passed without trouble, but my brother stayed restless. He paced the edge of the clearing and scanned the trees. He said the feeling hadn't gone away, that it came and went like pressure. I told him it was just the woods playing tricks. Without leaves, depth feels wrong. Sound travels oddly. He nodded but did not look convinced. We slept poorly. Every small noise cut through the quiet. A branch shifting sounded close even when it wasn't. I woke to find him sitting upright, listening. He said nothing had happened, but his eyes stayed open long after mine closed again. The next day, the feeling followed us as we hiked deeper. The trail narrowed and dipped into thicker brush. He kept stopping and listening. Once, I thought I heard something too, but when I focused, it was just wind pushing through dry stems. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to feed his nerves. By late afternoon, we found another clearing and set camp again. The temperature dropped hard after sunset. The sky went clear and black. Stars looked close enough to touch. We ate quickly and sat near the fire until the cold pushed us into our bags. Sometime that night, he got up to relieve himself. I heard him unzip his bag and step out. The ground crunched under his boots. He moved away from camp, toward a stand of brush where the trail dipped. I lay there half awake, waiting for him to come back. Minutes passed, then more. The cold crept in where his body heat had been. I listened for his steps. Nothing. I called out once, soft at first, then louder. The sound felt wrong in the still air. It went nowhere. I got up and grabbed my light. I followed the direction he had gone, keeping the beam low. His boot prints were clear in the frost-soft dirt, leading toward the brush. I followed them until they reached a dense patch of tangled growth. Then they stopped. Clean. No scuffing. No turn back. No sign of a struggle. Just the end of a line. I stood there shaking, light sweeping the ground. Beyond the brush, the terrain dropped into uneven rock and leaf-filled gaps. Footprints would vanish there fast. I called again, louder now, panic breaking through. The forest swallowed the sound. I searched until my hands went numb and my light dimmed. I circled back to camp and waited for daylight, sitting by a cold fire ring, staring into trees that looked the same in every direction. At first light, I walked the area again. The boot prints were still there, sharp where they ended. Beyond them, nothing. No broken branches. No dragged leaves. No blood. Just silence. I hiked out as fast as I could and got help. Search teams came in that afternoon. They worked the area for days. They found his boot prints leading into the brush and then stopping. They mapped the terrain beyond and found places where the ground turned rocky, where a person could move without leaving tracks. There were steep dips, hidden sinkholes, and old animal paths that vanished into thickets. They found nothing else. The official explanation settled on an accident, that he stepped off the trail, lost footing in the dark, and fell into rough ground, that he might have been injured and unable to respond, that scavengers and weather erased signs quickly. It made sense on paper. What didn't fit was the feeling he had before, the way he kept checking behind us, the certainty in his voice when he said something was following, staying just out of view. I dismissed it because it was easier than accepting that he might have been right. Years passed. No body was found. No closure arrived. I learned more about how easily a person can vanish in wilderness without leaving evidence, how brush can hide movement, how another human, patient and quiet, can track without being seen, how stress sharpens instincts even when the mind tries to explain them away. I still camp. I still walk trails, but I pay attention now to the feeling of being watched. Not fear, not imagination, that steady pressure that tells you something has noticed you. When a trail feels wrong, when the woods feel focused instead of open, I turn around. I do not argue with that sense anymore. I learned too late that ignoring it can cost more than pride. I went camping to write. That was the whole reason. I had been stuck for months, filling notebooks with half lines and crossing them out. My apartment felt loud even when it was quiet. Every surface reminded me of unfinished work. I needed space where nothing expected anything from me. I picked a stretch of open land far from towns and marked trails. No campground, no neighbors, just public land where you were allowed to stay if you didn't leave a mess. I packed light but careful. Tent, food, water filter, notebook, pens. I brought 2 notebooks in case one failed me. That felt important at the time. The drive took most of a day. The last hour was on dirt roads that narrowed until grass brushed both sides of the car. When I parked, the air felt different. Not dramatic, just empty. The kind of quiet that doesn't echo because nothing is there to send sound back. I hiked in far enough that I couldn't see the car anymore, then kept going a little more. I set camp near a low rise where the ground was flat and dry. No trees close enough to drop branches. Good sight lines. I noticed that without thinking. It mattered to me that nothing could approach without crossing open ground. The first night went exactly how I wanted. I wrote by headlamp until my neck hurt. The words came slow but steady. The dark stayed still. Wind moved grass. An owl passed somewhere high. Nothing felt wrong. The second day followed the same pattern. Morning writing. Walking in the afternoon. More writing after dark. I cooked over a small fire and kept it low. Sparks died fast in the cool air. When I slept hard. The third night changed the tone without warning. I didn't notice it right away. I was deep into the notebook, working through a section I had been avoiding for weeks. My hand found a rhythm. Pen scratching paper in short bursts. Pause. Scratch again. That was when I noticed movement at the edge of the firelight. Not a shape, just motion. Something pacing where light faded into dark. Slow steps, even spacing. Too steady to be wind. Too heavy to be a small animal. I stopped writing and looked up. The movement stopped. I waited, pen hovering above the page. The dark stayed still. I told myself it was coincidence, that my shift in posture had made a noise that spooked whatever it was. I put the pen back down and wrote another line. The movement resumed. The pacing followed the same rhythm as my hand. Scratch, step, pause, scratch, step. It stayed just far enough away that the fire never touched it. I leaned forward, trying to catch a shape, but the light fell short every time. When I stopped writing, it stopped moving again. My chest felt tight, but my mind stayed busy. Animals are curious. They match movement. Predators test boundaries. I told myself that over and over. I picked up a stick and tossed it into the dark. The pacing paused, then shifted farther out. Still there, still listening. I sat still for a long time, staring into the fire until the coals settled. The dark held its distance. I convinced myself it had moved on. I went back to the notebook because that was why I was there. Because stopping felt like giving something power it didn't deserve. The pacing started again the moment my pen touched paper. Not closer, not farther, just present. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear speech. Just footsteps pressing into dirt and grass with careful weight. Whoever or whatever it was knew exactly where the light ended. My thoughts stopped drifting. They narrowed. I wrote shorter sentences, clear ones. The pacing adjusted with me. Faster when I wrote fast. Slower when I slowed. When I paused to think, it paused too. I tested it again. I stopped completely, hands still, eyes up. Nothing moved. I wrote one word. One step answered. I sat back and let the pen drop onto the notebook. The pacing ended. The silence after felt thick. My ears rang with it. I listened harder than I ever had, but nothing else revealed itself. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the fire alive longer than planned, feeding it small pieces so it never flared. I stayed inside the circle of light until exhaustion took over. When I woke, the fire was ash and the land looked normal again. In daylight, I searched around camp. I found scuffed dirt just beyond where the light would have reached. Long strides, heavy weight, no clear shoe pattern, but the marks were too even to be hooves. Whoever made them had moved with care, placing feet where the ground wouldn't crumble. I told myself it was another camper who had wandered too close. Someone curious, someone rude. That explanation worked until night came again. I waited longer to write. I ate cold food to avoid firelight drawing attention. When the dark fully settled, I finally opened the notebook. The pacing began before the first full sentence. This time it was closer, not inside the light, never inside, but close enough that I could hear the fabric of my tent shift behind me when the ground pressed down. The steps circled slowly, staying to one side, always where my eyes struggled. I wrote anyway. My hand shook at first, then steadied. I focused on the page, on the scrape of pen tip, on the fact that my thoughts were turning into marks. The pacing matched every movement. When I stopped to think, it stopped. When my thoughts stalled, nothing moved. When I formed a sentence and wrote it, the steps returned. That was when I understood it wasn't the sound it was following. It was the act, the intent. The moment thought became action. The realization made my skin crawl. I wrote a line about leaving. The pacing sped up. I wrote about fear. It slowed. I wrote about watching. It shifted closer, then stopped. I closed the notebook and pressed it flat with my palm. The pacing ended. I sat there shaking, listening to my pulse. I didn't hear footsteps anymore. I didn't hear anything that should have made sense. The dark felt full in a way it hadn't before. I wrote one last thing. Not a story. A note to myself. A reminder, scratched hard into the page while my breath came shallow. Do not stay where something listens to your thoughts. The pacing started immediately, faster than before, circling wide, then narrowing. Dirt shifted, grass bent, weight pressed close enough that I could smell earth and sweat mixed together. I didn't wait for daylight. I packed with my headlamp off, working by memory. I left food. I left gear. I kept the notebook. I broke camp as quietly as I could and walked away from the light I never lit. As I moved, I heard sound behind me that wasn't footsteps. It was breath pushed through a throat shaped enough to copy rhythm but not tone. The pattern of words I had written came back to me, broken and thin, carried on air, not spoken, just shaped. I did not turn around. I walked until the sky lightened and the land opened again. I didn't stop until I saw the car. I didn't rest until I was miles away. Later, when I read the notebook, the writing was clear. Nothing was added. Nothing was changed. The marks in the dirt explained enough. Someone had been there. Someone patient. Someone practiced at staying just out of sight, reading behavior, predicting movement, learning patterns. I didn't go back to retrieve what I left. I still write, just not out there. And never again in a place quiet enough that someone can hear a thought become real. I decided to go winter camping because I needed to be alone. The forest felt cleaner in winter, stripped of distractions. Snow muffled sound. Cold kept animals mostly hidden. I packed light but warm. A 4-season tent, heavy sleeping bag, stove, extra layers. I drove hours into the mountains and parked at the edge of a trail that disappeared into a ridge covered in firs and spruce. The sun was low, pale through clouds. When I started hiking in, my boots crunching over frozen ground and scattered leaves. The first mile was quiet, not the quiet of summer, where birds still chirp and insects hum, but a quiet that pressed in, solid and dense. My breath came in white puffs, drifting and breaking against the trees. I set a steady pace and watched my shadow stretch long across the snow. The wind was light, barely moving the branches, but the scent of pine and ice filled my nose. I found a clearing by late afternoon. The snow was shallow there, frozen under the last week's thaw. The ground was flat, enough to pitch my tent without worrying about sliding or pooling water. I unpacked slowly, hammering stakes into the frozen soil. The tent went up without issue. I set my small stove near the edge, gathered some wood, and built a tiny fire just enough to boil water. Flames licked the cold air, but the wind threatened to snuff them out every few minutes. I ate quickly, watching the daylight fade, and then settled into my sleeping bag as darkness took the clearing. Night fell hard. The sky was clear, stars bright and sharp. The moon rose pale and cold, reflecting off the snow. I had expected silence, but winter has a way of layering sound differently. frost cracking in branches, snow shifting under its own weight, my own breathing loud in the cold air. I slept lightly, waking often to the sharp snap of ice or the creak of frozen limbs. The second night was colder. I woke to a wind that had picked up, sliding snow in sheets across the clearing. I kept the fire low. Wood burned slower than expected, smoke curling straight up without dispersion. I noticed prints near the edge of the clearing in the fresh snow. Human-like, perhaps, but uneven, not entirely formed. They led toward the treeline, then disappeared. I traced them with my eyes, but the snow was soft beneath the branches, and any marks could have been covered by drifting snow or fallen needles. I shrugged it off. Winter makes everything look wrong. Shadows stretch differently. Snow holds shapes that vanish within hours. Still, I noticed a pattern. The prints repeated near the clearing each morning, faint depressions that weren't mine, never leading away. The third night was the worst. The wind had died completely, leaving an absolute stillness that pressed in. I was writing in my notebook, sitting just outside the tent where the firelight reached, when I heard soft crunching. Step, pause, step, pause. It wasn't fast. It wasn't rushing. Just movement, pacing along the edge of the firelight. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, but the rhythm was too deliberate, too steady. It matched my movements as I wrote. I stopped writing. The footsteps stopped. I wrote again. They resumed. I didn't look up at first. My hands shook slightly. Each pause felt like weight pressing in, like the space around me had suddenly gained depth. The windless air carried nothing else. No rustling leaves, no distant animal cry. The sound stayed, not approaching, not retreating, just pacing along the margin where light met shadow. I finally forced myself to glance toward the treeline. The snow was fresh. No prints had formed along that edge, not deep enough to track, nothing visible under the pale firelight. I stayed awake the rest of the night, writing slowly, carefully. Each scratch of pen on paper felt louder, more deliberate, as if it echoed in that frozen space. The pacing continued for hours, matching the strokes. My fire dwindled. Frost formed along the tent flaps. My fingers went numb even inside gloves. Morning came gray and heavy. Clouds pressed down, dimming the weak winter light. I packed slowly, inspecting the area as I went. The snow near the treeline was smooth, no tracks leading away, nothing that explained the pacing. I stepped carefully over the depressions near the tent, realizing they were shallow, perhaps caused by weight on snow that had since compacted and melted slightly overnight. It wasn't animal. It wasn't human in the way I could recognize. The hike out felt longer than it had coming in. The forest seemed more enclosed in daylight, the shadows tighter under heavy branches. Every step I took, I checked behind me, half expecting the same rhythm to follow. Nothing did. The clearing vanished behind a curve in the trail. The prints never reappeared. I tell myself that winter changes perception. Snow absorbs sound, isolates, makes distance hard to judge. The prints, the pacing, the strange sense of being watched could have been frost shifting, a large branch settling, even my own imagination stretched thin by cold and isolation. Everything has a plausible explanation if I allow it to. I still camp in winter, but differently. I avoid open clearings where wind dies completely, where shadows stretch without distraction. I keep the fire between myself and tree lines. I write less. I pay attention to how the air carries sound, how snow shifts under weight, how absolute stillness can feel like presence. The lesson I took away is simple but lasting. Winter strips everything to its bare essentials. Sight, sound, balance, warmth. It leaves you exposed to what's real and to what your mind wants to interpret as real. You learn quickly which instincts to trust. I learned that night to never ignore the rhythm of the land, the subtle changes in snow and silence, and to leave before uncertainty becomes danger.